Okay, well, YouTube is thinking, so we'll see.
All right.
Okay, it looks like we're good.
All righty. Um, well, hi everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thanks everyone for being here. Um, we're going to go ahead and dive into today's meeting. So, I just want to flag that I know a number of Energy Code board members are out this week. It is spring break, and so I think that has impacted a lot of schedules. I do think with the couple of folks that just joined, we have a quorum, so we should be able to vote on the bylaws. We will confirm when we get to that part of the agenda. All right, so our meeting plan for today, we'll go through some quick welcome slides and some introduction slides. Want to make sure that folks who were not able to join the last meeting can introduce themselves, especially because I think we have a couple new board members who missed the last meeting. So we'll do another quick round of introductions. We'll approve the meeting minutes from last time. And then we'll move on to review and vote for approval of the Energy Code Board bylaws. After that, we're going to move into a discussion. We'll review at a high level some of the public engagement plan that we shared with you all with the agenda. Kind of share the elements of that plan, the schedule that we've included in that plan, and then we've got a couple of questions for you all that will help us further outline our process for engaging folks through those different meetings and through those elements. And then I'm going to hand the reins over to Anna, who is going to take us through for the remainder of our meeting through the major changes between the 2021 and the 2024 commercial IECCs. So it'll be a pretty information heavy meeting. With that, I hope and encourage you all to be taking your own notes, be actively thinking through questions if you have them, and really take advantage of Anna's expertise while we've got her to make sure that you all have a pretty strong comprehensive understanding of those changes between the two commercial IECCs. Then at the end, as we approach 3 o'clock, we'll just have a couple of next step comments for you all, and then we'll wrap up. So that's where we're headed. Any questions or concerns? Not hearing any. Meeting objectives for the day are to review and approve via a vote on the bylaws, to discuss the scope of the public engagement plan with some targeted questions from our team, and then for you all to really deep dive into the differences between the 2021 and the 2024 IECC specific to the commercial code. All righty, so what I'd like to start with, and I'll stop sharing for a moment, is if you were not at the last meeting, if you could please raise your hand, and I will put you on the spot and ask you to introduce yourself. Would love to know your name, your organization, and what are your favorite pizza toppings? And yes, we did ask everybody this last time, so now you also all have to share. Carolyn, your name popped up first in my square, so I'll pass it to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to see those of you I know from the last round, and good to meet those of you who I didn't meet the last meeting. I'm Carolyn Elam. I am with the City of Boulder. I'm here in the capacity as the solar expert for the purposes of the panel. One of my favorite pizza toppings, I'm kind of conventional in the pepperoni and then something green, and I'll alternate between spinach and green peppers. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. Great to see you. Jesse, I will pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Burley. I'm the Sustainability Manager with the Town of Breckenridge, and I'm here in the Rural Municipality Rep capacity, also representing Climate Zone 7. And my favorite pizza, I like white pizzas, so the blue cheese and, you know, the green stuff on there. Lots of arugula. That's good pizza.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. And then last but not least, Sean.
Good afternoon. Sean Wyatt. I'm the business manager of Plumbers Local 3 here in Denver, representing organized labor. Favorite pizza toppings are pepperoni, cream cheese, and jalapeno.
Sean, we could split a pizza. That's my favorite toppings as well.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for that. For those of you who weren't at the last meeting, we sent this out in the meeting notes, or excuse me, in my agenda email. But at any time, if you guys want to reference names, roles, locations, climate zones of the different Energy Code Board members, all of that can be found on CEO's website under the Energy Code Board. And if you click on Energy Code Board members, there's a little drop down menu that outlines everyone's role and what specific representation they have for this board. So that is there as a resource for you all as you need it. And we'll continue on. So the next thing we're going to do is approve the meeting minutes from last time. So how this typically works, as a quick reminder, I'm going to have a board member make a motion to approve the minutes from last time. Then I will need a second, and then I will ask for all in favor. Those who are in favor will unmute and say aye in no particular order. And then I'll ask for all opposed. And if anyone is opposed to approving the meeting minutes as they are, we will have that person unmute and say aye when I ask that question. So what I need from the board today is for someone to make a motion for approval. Tim.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the minutes as published, which shows the changes that we agreed on at the last meeting.
Thank you, Tim.
This is Kevin, second that motion.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, all in favor of approving the meeting minutes, please say aye.
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 Wonderful. Anyone opposed to approving the meeting minutes, please say aye. All right, wonderful. Meeting minutes are approved. Thank you all for that. And now we'll go through the bylaws and quickly cover the changes. And then what we're going to do today is also ask for a board motion to approve the bylaws. And we will be voting using a hand raise to indicate a majority vote. So the two proposed changes to the bylaws, which were captured in the versions that we shared with you all when we sent out the agenda. The first was to add a section permitting the executive committee to request additional discussion with the Energy Code Board if they are proposing significant changes to the language or meaning of a code element that was already created with the Energy Code Board. So that language was added, workshopped with the board last time, and you should see that reflected in the updated bylaws. And then the other change that was requested was to add links for all of the CRS references in the bylaws. So with that, would love to hear I guess, let me ask really quick, because this is, I was not there for the board approval last time. Adam, do we motion for this, or can we just do a vote?
I think we should motion for it.
Okay, great. Well, I will ask for a motion to approve the bylaws.
This is Buchanan, so moved.
Thank you, Rob. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, for this one, to make sure we can track the majority vote, I'm going to ask if you are in favor of approving the bylaws to please raise your hand. Thank you, everyone. That is, keep them up, please. Okay, great. So that is 14 votes to approve the bylaws, and that is a majority of the Energy Code Board. You all can lower your hands. Thank you. And if anyone is opposed to approval of the bylaws, please raise your hand. And Kayla, I'm just gonna, there, thanks. Please raise your hand now. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Bylaws are approved, so we will send the final version of those bylaws, PDF version, to you guys for your records following this meeting.
Kim, just real quick, I think, having just done my first vote, it might be helpful if board members could add board to their name in Zoom so that, you know, it distinguishes who are board members versus who's staff and who's on the, so just by way of further identifying people, it might be helpful.
Yeah, Jesse, I think that's a great idea. I take for granted the fact that I was with all of these people for all of last year. So if you are a member of the board, if you don't mind hovering your mouse over the three corners in the top of your individual screen, clicking that, and then you should have an option in the dropdown to rename yourself. And if you can add board member, that would be wonderful. And then for all of our other folks on the call, if you are not a board member, I think also, moving forward, we can have it best practice that we have our organization name following our name so that there's a clear distinction. Thank you,
Hey,
Jesse.
everybody, this is Elizabeth. My vision is gone right now, so I cannot type, but I am a board member. This is Elizabeth Gilmore.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I will make that change for you. And thank you for being here. You're a trooper. I don't know how you're doing that. All right, everyone. Cool. So now let's move into the next section of our agenda. So we want to spend about 20 minutes today reviewing the public engagement plan and spending some time discussing with you all what it will look like as we move forward with our public engagement. So quick reminder on how it happened during the last process. So the CEO has two forms on one Google form on the website for the Energy Code Board that allows the general public to submit general comments and to submit code proposals. So that form was open and available during all of our first round process. And we asked the board members to review the documents that house all of the public comments and the code proposals ahead of each meeting. And at the start of each meeting, asked the board members if there were any comments or code proposals that they wanted to discuss with the board. So there was sort of an ongoing review of submitted public comments through those forms. And a few times during the Energy Code Board discussions, we focused the start of our calls on reviewing some of those comments. And then towards the end of the process last year, we had one public comment meeting to review and get feedback from the public on the draft code. So folks were asked to register in advance. Everyone who registered in advance was given 5 minutes to speak and or dialogue with the board. So it could be they could ask questions or they could just talk at the board. And then the board, that happened for the first half of the meeting, and during the second half of the meeting, the board discussed the comments and decided how, it sort of made some deliberations on how they wanted to update the draft code package. That was during a time when we had 3-hour Energy Code Board meetings, so there was much more time in those meetings to have that, just for context. So that's how it happened last time. That final public comment, or that one and only public comment meeting, happened after the the full code package draft was available and posted to the public. And so moving into how we consider the public engagement process for this round. I wanted to start by sharing some of the sort of the spectrum of public engagement that exists so that you guys can be considering this as we look at our public engagement plan and how the different elements of our plan are supporting that public engagement. So there are sort of 5 steps that we consider as far as an approach to involve the public in decision making. It goes from inform all the way up to empower, where inform is simply the entity making the decision is making the decision, and the folks, the members of the public are being informed of that decision, and as well as with balanced and objective information to help them understand the decision that was being made and the problems that are being solved for. The other end of the spectrum is empower, and this is really where a decision-making body would place the responsibility of that decision in the hands of the public, and basically say, whatever you all decide, we will do. Now, there's a couple pieces in the middle of that where I think it's important to consider. So consult is the next step up from inform, and this is a way to ask the public for feedback on the different decisions and analyses that the decision-making body has created. And then the promise to the public in this consult mechanism is that the decision-making body will listen to the comments and will reflect upon them, and then will share back and provide feedback to the public on how their input influenced the decision of the decision-making body. The next one is involve, and so this is where you're working a lot more directly with the public throughout the process. As you can see, these arrows are kind of hard to see, but they kind of help draw the picture of this is a lot more back and forth with the public, between the decision-making body and the public, to make sure that they're consistently understood and considered throughout the process. And so the promise to the public in Involve is that we'll actively work with you to ensure the concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the decision. And we'll also provide feedback on how that input was factored into the decision making. And then the last one we'll mention is collaborate. And so this is, as you can see, a lot of arrows moving in all directions. This is where you're partnering with the public for every aspect of decision making. So you're not giving the full decision making power to the public, but you're actively participating and partnering to identify solutions. So as you can see, moving from inform to empower, you kind of are increasing the impact of public engagement and public input on the decision. And so we'll share how we are sort of envisioning the different elements of our public engagement plan falling along this spectrum in this process. And we're happy to come back to this visual as we go through it. So to start off, we have 4 public engagement plan elements. 2 are on the slide, 2 are on the next, that were included in the public engagement plan. The first is an introductory webinar, and this would be new from how we did things last year. The role of this element in the public engagement plan is to inform the public. So to provide that objective information to the public about our process, how they can get involved, etc. And so the audience for this is the general public, the folks we hope will engage with us through this process. And you can see the objectives of our webinar there. The next element of our public engagement plan is public engagement meetings. And we have 3 of these scoped, and we'll kind of talk about those in a little more detail in a minute, for the public to give us direct feedback on their concerns, aspirations, visions. And the role of the board in that case would be, once the decision has been made, to say, here's how we took your input and here's how it influenced our decision. The audience for these meetings can really be anyone, but from last time we had some advocacy orgs, some local governments, engaged individuals, and the general public. And our objectives in those meetings are to collect input on the direction of the code and top priorities, as well as explore and consider equity concerns and impacts throughout the process. The other 2 plan elements we had in our public engagement plan is the first is the Google form. So this is the exact what we had last time in the process, where folks can submit a comment or submit a code proposal. We see the role of this plan element as consult. So again, providing that opportunity for direct feedback to the board on what the public is considering. Our objectives here are to collect public comment in a different format than some of our public engagement meetings. So this is the opportunity for folks to provide that written public comment if they so choose. And then for folks who are really in the weeds on code and want to propose code language, we also have that as an option, so folks can submit their proposed code language for board consideration. The way that we're suggesting in our public engagement plan this integrates into our process is similar to how we did it last time, and we'll be talking about this. It's one of our discussion questions. But carving out time at the beginning of each one of our meetings for the board to bring up different written public comment or code proposals to discuss at the start of each meeting. It's important to note that this process really relies on individual board members to review the proposals and initiate that discussion at the start of each meeting. And then the final plan element in our public engagement plan is project updates. So this is a new thing, and we're hoping the role of this element can be to inform the public. The audience is anyone signed up for that listserv that we have, and our objective is to provide regular touch points on the progress of the board and remind them about the public meetings and the open Google Forms. As well as, I think our team is considering, using these project updates to take some of the complicated code language that we might be discussing in these meetings and translate it into language that's more accessible for folks who might not be steeped in code language, by way of meeting summaries or other materials that can help folks more completely understand what was discussed and where those decisions landed. And so the process for this would be Lotus and CEO as applicable, developing recurring updates to share with the Energy Code Board listserv. So that was me talking at you guys for a minute. I'm going to pause there before we go into the schedule. Any thoughts or questions so far? Carolyn?
Yeah, no, thanks for putting this together, Kim. And I think as you and I dialogued a little bit offline, I do think ramping up our engagement going into this particular aspect of our duties is particularly important. It's moves well beyond just a couple of elements where we have already practical implemented experience when we talked about like electric ready requirements and solar ready requirements. Here we're really visioning forward. And so I do think these are really important. One thing that occurred to me as I was thinking about this is we may need to create space where we want to have more into the collaboration space of your spectrum. Specifically, I'm thinking around potential conversations that we might want to have, or like the involve, into the involve portion of your spectrum here. To, potentially invite those, across the chain that have to implement this code from, the regulatory side all the way through to the building and inspection side, to understand where the pitfalls and some of the aspects of what we're coming up with may be. We have some very learned colleagues here on the board itself. But I'm just kind of thinking that there may be some very specific sessions that we might want to hold and invite, specifically whether we get a broader range of the architectural community in or others to really dive into some very specific elements of the code to get their feedback and understand where some of our blind sides might be in terms of implementing code. So that's one of my proposals.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, Kayla.
Yeah, I think my question is more just around, I guess, the public engagement plan for the public engagement plan. So kind of if you could talk a little bit about how we are planning to get the word out about these public engagement opportunities and what the role of the board might be in that as far as, sending through our networks and just making sure that we're, making sure, I guess, that we are notifying people that we have these opportunities. They'll be building on one another as far as the level of engagement, and just wondering how we're planning to share that out through different networks.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Kayla. So I think this is sort of going to be round 2 of how we roll this out to the board, wanting to be respectful of the time, just trying to make sure we can fit everything into our 2-hour meeting today. But what our plan is for next steps is our team is compiling a contact list of orgs that we've worked with throughout Colorado and that we know are engaged in code or engaged in some fashion in environmental justice or sustainability as it relates to the built environment. So we're working on building out that list of orgs. We're going to share it with our wonderful subs Group 14 and then CEO to additionally kind of build out that contact list. Once we have a strong starting point, our goal is to send that out to the board so that all of you can then add your contacts in. I think we can talk about, we are very happy to be flexible in that. And so Kayla, if you've got your own listserv where it's like, well, it'd be better if I could just get the information and then I can send it out individually. We're happy to accommodate that as well. So I think it's our current plan is like, let's get a listserv together that we feel is pretty representative of the folks that we want to invite into the conversation. And then happy to work with the board on any other formats that work. Awesome. Tim.
Yeah, thanks. That partially answers the question I was going to ask, just about how's this whole list getting put together. I think it's really important, like extremely important, to get the development community involved along with the design community, AIA side of things. I know Kevin, I don't know how he's involved with the local chapter of the AIA, but from that standpoint, I think it's extremely critical, the Colorado chapter group with all the jurisdiction, because it'll be impacting all the way across the state. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So that's I think a good flag for our internal team. So what we can do when we're looking at that listserv is see if there's if we can't find those contact folks who have the control over maybe more regional or network-wide networks, so that we can inform them that we'll be sending updates about this process and project. That way they can include information out in their own individual newsletters on how to engage and how to be involved. Carolyn.
Yeah, along those lines, I appreciate Tim for naming that. Yeah, we're going through our code update in Boulder currently, and some of the ones that we've paid some special attention to in terms of reaching out to include our rental housing organizations, who I think is really helpful to both manage concerns as well as hear from their members and their experiences, and then our housing authority. And so I think definitely naming our housing authorities as key constituents to make sure we're doing outreach for were two that came to my mind.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, well, we will kind of follow up with the board with that contact list and a little bit more direction on if you guys have contacts, how to pull that, or if you have recommendations from our team on different orgs to reach out to, and we can go and kind of track down those folks. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, sorry, one more thought on the list is the Colorado Division of Housing to take care of modular manufactured homes, and what type of impact, with those guys. I sit on the TAC committee with them, so it'd be important to at least have them be able to provide input. Donnie and Sam, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Tim.
I will note that Mo is the Deputy Division Director for the Division of Housing, so we will certainly lean on him to get a lot of those contacts.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Adam. All right. So, yeah, appreciate those thoughts. And so now what I'm going to do is kind of cover what we have proposed right now as far as public engagement meetings. And right now, these are kind of scoped at a very high level, right? We have some high level objectives. We know roughly when these meetings will fit into our, well, not roughly, we have mapped out when these meetings will fit into our meeting schedule. And I think the step that we're going to be taking after this meeting, and that some of the discussion will work towards is going to help inform, is how we want to structure these meetings to be accessible for folks who might not be that adept at code speak. And if we want to switch up the format of these, Carolyn, to kind of get to your point of like, how do we get to that further level of involve rather than just the singular, one-way consult. And so some of those pieces will continue to be flushed out following this call. Yeah, Kristen. I think Kristen's trying to find the unmute button.
Although Zoom features are much easier on the computer than
I know.
when you do it on your phone. So I appreciate her.
No, that's okay. Maybe if you're able to type it out into the chat, or if you're able to find it, just raise your hand again and I'll call on you. Thanks, Kristen. Okay, so the first engagement that we have scoped is the public webinar. And so if you all want to add this to your calendars, we found a time that worked really well for CEO and Lotus's calendars, and that is Tuesday, May 14th, from 4 to 5:30. Adam, I don't know that we've added that invite to all of the board members.
We have not yet, but I can.
We have not. Okay. But we will get that invite sent out to you guys so you can hold that time on your calendars. So that first public webinar to kind of launch our engagement process will be May 14th. Where sort of between May 14th and the first public engagement meeting, which will be May 30th, is we wanted to just kind of tee up to you guys where we will be in the board process. Between now and May 30th, we will not be having really any robust code discussions. It's going to be a lot of information review and learning about the differences between the 2021 and the 2024, including commercial, residential, the appendices, and then sort of an overview of what's happening with building codes in the state. So just so you all know, before that first public engagement meeting, we won't have dove into those really deep code discussions yet. Thursday, May 30th, during our regularly scheduled board meeting, will be our first public engagement meeting. And again, at a high level, our objectives for that meeting are to get input on the direction for the low energy and carbon code before we start the discussions, as well as get some direction on equity considerations for the code changes and things that we want to be thoughtful of as we move through that process. Between May 30th and our next meeting, which I'll show you on the next slide, which will be October 17th, the board will be diving into our initial code discussions on residential and commercial code requirements. That will be sort of a deep dive as we went through during our last meeting, starting with commercial, moving to residential. And at the end of that process, we hope to have pretty strong direction on the draft code for those two different sectors. On Thursday, October 17th, we will have our second public engagement meeting. And this is, again, sort of our checkpoint with the public after we've had some initial code discussions, kind of figured out our general direction on feedback to get feedback on those code elements. And again, to check in on equity impacts of the proposed code elements. Between October 17th and January 9th, which was our currently scoped final public engagement meeting, we will be building the final draft code package. So that will be our opportunity to integrate any public comment we received in October into that and really finalize all of in final draft form, finalize the elements of the commercial and residential code requirements. On Thursday, January 9th, we would have our final public engagement meeting where we would be getting input and feedback on the final code package. Between January 9th and January 31st, that will be the board's time to make any final changes we want to the code package based on our final public engagement meeting. And on January 31st, the board will be voting to approve or not approve the different code elements. So that's currently how we have our public engagement meetings scoped through our process. And I guess any thoughts on that thoughts or questions on that before I jump into our discussion questions? Kayla.
I have a quick question. We had talked in the last meeting about if the board would be present at the public engagement meetings or not. And I see in the engagement plan, it looks like we're debriefing those public engagement meetings after the fact. So I'm assuming board members are not going to be in attendance at these meetings, but I just want to clarify.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's actually the opposite of that, Kayla. So the one that so the Thursday, May 30th meeting, the October 17th meeting, and the January 9th meeting are during regularly scheduled board meetings, and we're going to ask the full board to attend that like they would a normal meeting. So you all can hear the public comments, and if depending on the format of those meetings, once we finalize that, interact with the public on their thinking. For the public webinar, that's the first engagement coming up May 14th, that we're hoping everybody can show up to so that you guys can hear kind of the initial ideas on how the public wants to be engaged through this process, but that is sort of the optional meeting for the board. And then to Kayla's point, thank you for bringing that up, Kayla. Following our May 30th meeting, the October 17th meeting, and the January 9th meeting, we have a full 2-hour meeting block just to debrief the public comment, discuss as a board which comments we want to spend some time discussing and focusing on within our code. So there's that time carved out in our schedule to make sure that you all have the time to properly debrief those comment meetings. Kristen.
Hey, is it working this time?
Yes.
Good. I want to point out something that is probably obvious to everybody, but the time that you schedule to allow public engagement impacts the kind of engagement from the public you can get. If it's during normal, working hours when people who would be doing this not professionally are working their jobs, you're not likely to actually hear from those people. So I would urge you guys to consider having at least one opportunity that's outside of normally scheduled business hours so that we can hear from those kind of folks too. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate that feedback, and we will figure out how to work that in. Carolyn.
Yeah, on the January 9th one, not dissimilar to Kristen's comment, I'm concerned if we're doing it in a shorter block that will have adequate time. And so I was going to offer that perhaps for that final package, we actually plan at least 2 public engagement meetings so that we can make sure that we're hitting a broader segment of folks who may be interested. And then I had a question. There's a meeting between the 9th and the 31st.
Yes.
Just one.
I should have the syllabus up. Let me pull that up and check where we're at with that. Sorry, hold please as I scroll. So we would have the January 9th meeting, where we would, be hearing from the public. The next meeting would be the 21st, where we have the debrief, on any final changes, and then the final meeting on the 31st.
Yeah, so I might be a little bit concerned that that's a little bit of a tight schedule. If just reflecting on our process last time, where we did make some fairly substantive changes towards the end, and just acknowledging that we may need to have additional, space for discussion and such. So just wanted to make sure that doesn't necessarily we need to move it up, but it may mean that we need to add some time at the end on the backside to allow for a little bit extended adoption process, just depending, to be responsive to anything that we hear from that public engagement, and allow your team sufficient time to present any proposed changes back to us and for us to digest it. So that's just a thought on that particular one. And then I just thought I'd offer, from what I raised earlier, I would envision that occurring between the May 30th and the October 17th meetings. If we wanted to have some additional engagement, it would be in that time window that I was thinking of.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. Jesse.
Thanks. Going back to the May 14th meeting, I know this board is made up of a diverse group of people, but for local governments, Tuesday nights are often a council meeting night. So I can flag May 14th as a night that I certainly have a conflict, but I'm not sure how many others do. So just flagging that.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. The meeting currently is scheduled for 4 to 5:30, which I know would kind of fall right in the middle of that sweet spot, especially for folks in local government. So we can consider if there's another option or time for that. We found in Lotus's work through public engagement, trying to span that in between work hours seems to capture a lot of the folks that we're trying to get, both the 9 to 5 and the folks who work non-9 to 5 schedules. So that was why that time slot was chosen. But yeah, we can review the date. Rob.
Yeah, so we do have we have a Google form available. I just want to be really careful about adding meetings, because we're going to be meeting on this pretty regularly for the next 10 months. So I want to make sure that we do have the Google form available for the general public, to make sure that they have an opportunity to make to raise their concerns or raise their points, and that's pretty much omnipresent. So I'm just concerned about adding meetings, because we're meeting an awful lot in the circumstances are today.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I appreciate that perspective, and we will, I think, probably take all of this really great input, kind of figure out what we think as a team might be the next best step, and we'll come back to you all with a recommendation on how to accommodate all of these various comments. With that, I think we did have some discussion questions. I know how important this public engagement discussion is, but I think in the essence of time, I want to hand the reins over to Anna so we can make sure we start that code discussion and that you don't feel super tight on time for that, Anna. So what I will plan to do is we've got these kind of questions that are really geared at trying to understand how we can make this process more accessible for folks that are not code folks, but that we want their input from. And so I'm happy to follow up with folks after this call and send these questions, and would love you all's thoughts. Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, don't want to belabor this point too, but I also just want to remind everybody that the deadlines that are being set for completion of this code are set in statute. So the Energy Office is not setting these, DOLA is not setting these, Lotus is not setting these. And so I just think it's really important that we, in considering how we are going to be doing robust public engagement with it, which I think we all agree is absolutely necessary, we also need to be ensuring that the board has enough time to complete the work that it needs to complete. And we have statutory deadlines, just like the last process, that we are obligated to meet. So just wanted to reiterate that for folks and just understand that I think we would all love as much public engagement as possible, but also recognizing that we do need to be realistic about the time we need to complete this code. So just there needs to be a balance between those two things.
Thanks, Adam. Excuse me. Okay, so again, I will send out these questions and we'll figure out how we can carve out some time to continue to talk about this at our next meeting. But in the meantime, if you all have thoughts on these questions in between meetings, I would welcome you all to share your ideas with us so that we can begin to craft those meetings in a format that we think is accessible and accommodating to everyone. And so with that, Anna, I'm going to pass it over to you and just let me know when I can swap slides for you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Today, what we're talking about are the major upgrades to the 2024 IECC. So there were, as I'm sure you all are aware, huge changes between the 2021 and the 2024. So today, what we're talking about are those major changes that are going to affect annual energy use and cost, as well as first cost, because there's some items that were changed that will really impact first cost of construction that will have a little bit less impact on annual energy use. I do also want to note that the 2024 IECC has not been officially approved. It is still working through the appeals process. So we're working off of the draft version. And this is draft number 2. In case you all are following along with your own, I think it's like 800-page document. So go ahead. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me, especially if you are confused about what the 2021 IECC says. So as far as envelope changes go, really the focus here seemed to be making sure that thermal bridges through the envelope have been properly addressed and that they are accurately calculated and included within the ComCheck or UA calculation, as well as in any energy models. So our first bullet point here, we're talking about if you have a mechanical penetrations that are greater than 1% of the opaque building above grade wall area. So for this building, we're thinking about kind of a multifamily building with PTHPs. It has those units in the residential units that push right through the wall, and you have a mechanical penetration right on the outside of every residential unit. That's where we're going to start seeing greater than 1% of your thermal envelope. Your typical office building doesn't have mechanical penetrations that are 1% of your building envelope typically. Those mechanical penetrations must be included in the UA calculation or in the energy model. Z-GERTs, there was a little bit more discussion around or requirements around making sure that your continuous insulation structure is offset from the structure of the building. So if you have vertical Z-GERTs, they are not lined up directly with your metal framing to create a continuous thermal bridge through the insulation, as well as requiring they must allow for continuous insulation. So we can't have a full break through the insulation. Any columns or beams that project through the thermal envelope must be wrapped with a minimum of R5 continuous. And then there's also requirements around parapet insulation to maintain that continuous thermal envelope. Any questions on kind of continuous insulation thermal envelope changes? Great. Keep it going. Okay. There were a couple updates to the those tables that show the prescriptive U factors and R value combinations. The U factors weren't updated, additional options for both wood and steel framing as far as prescriptive R values go. There was a very slight reduction in maximum U factor for fixed fenestration from U 0.3 to U 0.34 from U 0.36. It's just providing a very slight increase in the insulative factor of the fixed fenestration. Go ahead. Okay, this is a big one. So building thermal envelope testing has been required to show continuity of the air barrier and that there are no major leaks. Now, however, previously under the 2021, there weren't any corrective action that was really required. Now under the 2024, if the measured air leakage rate, so the air leakage rate has to meet 0.35. If the measured air leakage rate is between 0.35 and 0.45 CFM per square foot of thermal envelope, testing to visualize those leaks must be completed, and all leaks must be sealed where sealing can be completed without damaging envelope components. A retest does not need to be completed, but you do have to have something signed saying that, you know, these leaks were sealed to the best of our ability. If your envelope has an measured air leakage rate greater than 0.45 CFM per square foot, corrective action must be taken. And that means, I mean, they could require you to take down your cladding to get to these issues. It's a big deal if you're not sealing your envelope correctly during construction. So this is really important and really does affect energy use, just because we're going to require, we're going to have less infiltration because of these requirements. We got a question in the chat. Would the 1% be calculated on just the individual wall area or the entire exterior wall area of all floors? It is the entire exterior envelope. So roof, walls, floors, cube. Yes, Rob.
Yeah, so just clarifying then that this is, or making sure I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah.
Air leakage testing, i.e. a blow-door test is going to be required for commercial buildings.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That was what I had for, oh, there is one more. Sorry. If we have a balcony or floor deck that penetrates the thermal envelope, typically, not typically, in some cases, we'll see that the concrete floor deck just penetrates right on through the thermal envelope, and there's no attempts to mitigate that thermal bridge. If that is not allowed to happen unless an approved thermal break device of at least R10 is installed. So that'll be an increased cost to try and really reduce that large thermal bridge. Okay, that was what I had on envelope. Is there anything else you guys wanted, any concerns you had about I don't know if anybody's read through the 2024, but. Okay, we'll keep moving. Oh, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. We see this quite often with podium or concrete podium type. And I think that's why this is finally making it into the code. But I've yet to see a detail to do that thermal break through there. So I think that the designers are going to go through an area weighted U factor. So I would be interested in this meeting to have somebody send me an example of that.
Yeah,
which would be just helpful for me with my plan review. Thanks.
Yeah, there are definitely products out there that can do that too. I can send you one. Yeah. Will you
Anna,
Alright.
I'll flag that and we'll
Thanks,
we
Kim.
will talk about it. Yep, and we'll get it out to everyone.
I said I would do it, but I will totally forget if I don't write it down. Rob, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, I did. Are any of these, just kind of knowing my experience with the residential code, that envelope measures tend to be among the most contentious? Are any of these elements still contentious within? Are these what are still? Are any of these measures what is kind of holding up the commercial code from moving from draft to final form? Like, I guess what I'm trying to determine is which of these are still points of contention within the commercial code, so we can kind of figure out, which ones we need to maybe pay close attention to before the code becomes finalized.
Yeah. So, and go ahead, Adam, if you have any additional information about this. My understanding is that the appeals are really centered around section C406 for the most part. And that if the building does not have heat pump heating, there are additional points that are required to show compliance with section C406.
Yeah, so that was one of
Okay,
the big ones.
thanks for clarifying.
The other big one was for the appeals were about the readiness provisions that the ICC included in the base code, which I think are not particularly relevant here, given that we already have many of these readiness provisions in our own model code that you all created last year. But I think that was the other big point of contention.
Great. And then Ron, did you have a question? Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to mention that there are some proprietary products out there that deal specifically with this thermal break issue for concretes.
Yeah.
I could put one in the chat.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ron. Okay. HVAC didn't have as many changes as I expected, so that's great. The HVAC total, there is an option now to show compliance with section C403, which is the HVAC section, using the total system performance ratio. And this is now section C409, but we're not going to walk through it because it's a long calculation. But essentially, this uses the average efficiency of your HVAC system to show that you are compliant with the HVAC provisions of, all of those tables that show the efficiency required for your different HVAC systems. So this allows you to basically say, my building on average meets the requirements of the IECC, and you're not looking at every single piece of equipment. An update as well is buildings greater than 100,000 square feet are required to have fault detection and diagnostics. And this could trigger a building automation system for a building that otherwise may not have had one. Under the 2021 IECC, fault detection and diagnostics were required for systems that serve a square footage of 100,000 square feet or greater. So think about a really large office building that had central heating hot water. We would require fault detection and diagnostics. But now for your building, if it is 100,000 square feet or greater, you are required to have fault detection and diagnostics on your systems. So just some additional monitoring there to make sure everything's operating as it should be. Slight increase in minimum efficiencies for some types of equipment, mostly focusing around heat pumps. There was a little bit of rework around all of those efficiency tables for inside the US and outside the US, and some clarifications within the tables themselves, but overall, pretty minor changes to the required efficiencies of the new HVAC equipment under the 2024. A big change is the demand responsive controls for electric heating and cooling systems. So now if you have a heat pump or if you have a rooftop unit with an electric heating coil, you're going to be required to have demand responsive controls that can be used to reduce your peak energy use upon a call from the utility. And then there were significant changes to the requirements for residential units under the commercial code. So increasing fan and ventilation efficiency. And then, also requiring, this was an interesting one, that your heating and cooling kind of, so if you think about a residential unit, you have outdoor air ducted to the return of your fan coil unit. That central fan in your fan coil unit cannot be used for ventilation. So your outdoor air has to be provided separately to the unit, and you can't be using that fan coil unit central fan for constant supply air just to ventilate, unless the fan meets the efficiency requirement listed there. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. So I know the commercial portion of this, when it talks about residential, would, I'm sure, still be applying to the 4-story or taller.
Yes.
And at a 3-story or less are going to have the possibly, hopefully, maybe somewhat the same type of changes. Well, I guess maybe you'll touch on that.
You get residential next meeting. I don't want to spoil a surprise.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is all 4 stories and above. Thanks for that clarification. And that was it for HVAC. Service water heating. We have a slight increase for efficiency in gas water heaters. I think we went to 84% from 82. There was some clarifications around making sure that if we have central domestic hot water, we do not have constant pumping going on. Circulation system shuts down when there's no call for domestic hot water. And then again, demand responsive water heating. So you have to have controls, or you have to have, if you have an electric water heater, you have controls that are, or the capability for the utility to reduce your peak demand. That's it. Tim?
Yeah, quick question on that first bullet point. So the efficiency for gas water heaters, would that be in line with the minimums required by the feds, or was that in consulting with the DOE or whoever makes those up?
That's a good question. I'll have to look that up and get that back to you. Go to the next slide.
I did. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did. There we go. I was like, oh, there might be just 2 slides that read the same. I was like, I swear I hit next. Okay, back to you.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, big changes to the power and lighting section of the code. So this is where it gets really interesting. So there are updated lighting control strategies, including daylight requirements. I don't know if you guys remember the specific targets for wattages within the daylight zones, but those have been halved. So we're going to see a lot more daylight controls required for buildings with low lighting power densities. There are a requirement for demand responsive lighting controls. So there has to be an 80% reduction in your lighting power upon signal receipt from the utility to reduce your peak lighting use or peak energy use. Reduced lighting power densities, both interior and exterior. In the interior space types, we saw about, on average, a 5% reduction. So there are some spaces that actually had their allowable lighting power densities increased, and some where they were really decreased, worked out to about a 5% average. And then the exterior lighting power reduction was about 35%. Kristen, go ahead.
Does this have a building square footage minimum or max?
Which one? Sorry.
Did the lighting power controls only apply to buildings over 100,000 square feet?
Mm-mm.
Thank you.
Sure. And then Energy monitoring. So we remember that there was a section in the 2021 that required sub-metering of different electrical end uses. They've updated that table. So the energy monitoring now includes gas HVAC end uses, district chilled water, district heating, EV charging is required to be sub-metered separately, electric water heating, and PV production as well. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for the questions, but this last bullet point, energy monitoring, when we move towards possibly adopting this part of the code, I wonder how that's going to interplay with the electric ready provisions of the code that we already just did. You know, that's, of course, it just says electric ready with what we're enforcing now, but how that might overlay into this bullet point, just as a point of discussion when we get moving further along to see how those two would work.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. There also now is a requirement for EV charging. So we'll have to do some comparison, like Tim was saying with the last one, around requirements for the EV charging. There are specific definitions around EV capable, EV ready, and EVSE spaces. What % of those spaces are required based on occupancy type. And there also is a note that the electrical system must be sized to handle all potential EV charging loads. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to name this as, you know, for Kim and team, I think it would be great to get a comparison on how this compares to what we adopted as our state minimum code. I know we largely leaned on the proposal that was part of the 2024 package. But if we can really narrow in on where the discrepancies or changes are, that would be great.
Yeah, Carolyn, I think we have within our schedule for future down the line, as we will be revisiting the EV ready and solar ready and electric ready provisions, that there will definitely be some analysis of differences and obviously discussion about whether or not we want to maintain the states, you know, as we have developed them, if there are benefits to going with the 2024 or somewhere in between. So that will definitely be a part of that conversation.
Perfect, thanks.
Great. Yeah, I think that was what I had to say about this. Carolyn, you took care of it for me. So then on the, okay. Buildings 5,000 square feet and greater are now required, and it's mandatory to have on-site renewables at 0.75 watts per square foot of gross conditioned floor area, not to exceed the combined square footage of the 3 largest floors. So picturing a stepped building and making sure that we're calculating that correctly. There are exceptions for roof terraces, mechanical equipment, and vegetated space. So if the roof of your entire building is like a farm, green space, I guess probably not a working farm, you would have to comply with either some of these other options. There also is an exception for shading and potential production. So if you live in a place that isn't going to get sun, or you are a small building right next to a tower and you're not going to get any direct sun on your PV, then you do not have to provide that on-site renewables, and they have these other options. You can purchase off-site renewables. They must be within your local utility, or distribution entity must have direct connection to the building site. So pretty difficult to meet. And then there is, this kind of subpoint, all RECs for on-site and off-site renewables must be retired by or on behalf of the building. So you can't sell the RECs of your on-site PV. And then buildings that cannot supply on-site or off-site renewables can comply via purchasing RECs. And it is 5 times the amount required for on-site renewables. Carolyn?
Phantom hand.
All right. Go ahead, Adam.
Just a question on the 0.75 watts per square foot. Do you know how they came up with that calculation? Is the intent to like offset a certain percentage of energy consumption, or do you know where that came from?
I can pull that up in the proposal and get that over to you. I don't remember the calculation off the top of my head.
Thanks.
Sure.
Anna, one question for me as well. These offsite renewable rec requirements, do these align in any way with the zero energy appendix from the 2021, or did they? It's like in hearing this, it seems like they are similar, but I'm curious if there are major changes and if that's not the right reference point for these.
Yeah, they're similar in terms of you know, you can't sell the RECs as that you have for your on-site PV, things like that. But because this is kind of a constant amount across all buildings and they're not requiring that net zero energy, it's a little bit different in terms of first cost, especially, but also, you know, this is based on the area of your building. So you're really maximizing the PV on your roof rather than trying to offset a certain amount of energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Jesse?
Thanks. You know, having really just heard this for the first time, what happens if and when some of these requirements conflict with current utility programs and regulations? So, you know, in the event that 0.75 watts square foot of, well, actually, I just answered my own question there, but trying to come up with an example, but even just the option for offsite renewables without going through a particular type of program, like what happens if and when this conflicts with the way the utilities currently do things? Does that mean we make a recommendation and the legislature has to go back and correct it? Do we go to the like, what is the process for that when that comes up? Does that make sense, my question?
Yeah, no, it does. It's a great question. And I don't think that I'm the one to answer that. Adam, do you have any insight?
No, I think it would be something that ultimately the PUC would have to deal with for a lot of our, you know, IOUs and as in terms of a policy of what would be required. But I think there are also, I think that's part of, you know, maybe the consideration that this board should also be taking in deciding what requirements are, you know, make sense and which ones do not, as in, you know, how much difficulty could it cause for existing policy as well. Like that's something to take into account.
Because even just sizing the electrical panel for all the proposed EV requirements is like currently, maybe it's not in direct conflict, but it's pretty difficult to sort of oversize or future-proof your electrical panel on a project. Thinking through like all of the, you know, potential EV infrastructure that gets put in. So already there's just a few on here that I'm like, well, I'm not sure that we could do that with Excel at the moment. And maybe Rob can pipe in, but I just immediately see a couple of those potential conflicts. So thanks for that, Adam.
And if I may, Jesse, as you were raising your hand, and I was kind of writing down the same notes, and the one that jumped out to me was the offsite renewables bullet point on here. My suggestion is the board take that into consideration. And when we get closer to the time that we're talking about these specific provisions, maybe we can generate a couple specific questions for me that I can kind of look at and compare to current law and practice, and maybe take back to my team who works at the PUC quite a bit.
I have a question for you.
I didn't see who that was, but if you're talking to me, go ahead. Great.
I'll wait till I'm called on.
Oh, sorry.
I think you're up next, Kristen. Go for it.
The issue I see here is the additionality question. So a lot of utilities within the state offer incentives for renewables, but part of the reason that they're able to do that is because the state has authorized them to use ratepayer money for rebates and incentives, because customers are essentially going above and beyond what's required. So now the question would be, if a new build has to have these renewables, are they still eligible for those types of incentives? So that's like one example of the interplay between, code requirements and utility programs. Having also been on a rural electric co-op board, I know that that's a little different. That's not subject to PUC jurisdiction. So for municipality and for co-op utilities, which actually cover most of our state geographically, they would set their own policy with regard to that. And I also wanted to kind of reassure some people here on the watts per square foot gross conditioned area. Like, as an example here, if you had a 10,000 square foot commercial building, that would require 7.5 kilowatts of solar, for example, to meet that requirement. I have a 1,200 square foot house and I have 7.5 kilowatts of solar on my roof. So this doesn't strike me as a huge aggressive target, particularly because it only applies to the combined square foot of the 3 largest floors, but I would defer to our solar expert on that.
Kristen, can I take a stab at your first point?
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you a great lawyer answer, and it's going to be, it depends. And it probably depends on what the terms of those rebates are. Having just worked through some of those kind of things at the PUC, I can't think of a case where a rebate would not apply just because a building code required a similar action, right? But I think we'd have to look at it. We wouldn't. The person potentially getting or not getting the rebate would have to look at the particular rebate language. Generally, I'm not aware of any rebate language that would prohibit you from getting a rebate just because your building code requires it. Right?
Not rebate language, but a lot of times PUCs, you could check specifically in Colorado, require that if you're spending public money for an incentive, it has to be above and beyond what's required by law, like the additionality question. Yeah. So that was what I was getting to. But I don't want to belabor
honestly,
this
that's point. That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
And I will just note that at least with some of that I've reviewed with Excel's EV charging for like multifamily housing in particular, there are some exceptions where it says, for certain property types or for certain, income qualified properties, will help you meet the minimum code. But for other properties, these rebates or incentives are only available for those that exceed code requirements. And I don't know if Rob's got his hand raised, so I don't know if he plans to speak to any of that, but
I'll just say one more thing and I'm going to stop talking. And that is, there are some policy considerations that say it makes sense to stack these things, right? So it's just something else to consider.
Great. Thanks, guys. Elizabeth?
Hey, everybody. I can see again, so I'm back. Yeah, I know y'all will be surprised. I have a lot of questions about how this would be implemented, and just kind of going bullet by bullet. I know we'll talk about this a lot, I'm sure. As far as the sizing goes, I'm not super clear if the if the prescriptive requirement here is based on an array kilowatt size, a kilowatt per square foot based on conditioned floor area. I'm unclear about how the exceptions are applied, because that seems to apply to roof area rather than conditioned square foot area. And then also if there's any type of correlation between the array electrical size in kilowatts and the the square footage of the array size, and how that works, if there's like a minimum, and if there's a minimum energy production, like a kilowatt hour production per kilowatt, because as soon as we start talking about equivalent offset, there needs to be a definition of production. If we're doing RECs, right? Because it's going to be a kilowatt hour equivalent. on the, so lots of questions about
Here,
that.
let me,
And-
hold on,
and-
Elizabeth, let me start answering them for you.
Sure.
So, it is based on the size. So I'm sorry. Your first question is, how this calculation is quantified really. So it is based on the square footage of your conditioned floor area. So 0.7 watts times your gross conditioned floor area, gets you to your KW size. If that PV array cannot be provided on the roof because you have a fully occupied roof or you're covered in a sea of condensing units, that's when we start getting into the exceptions to provide offsite or to purchase RECs. Did that answer your first question?
Okay, so it's not like you could say, oh, okay, I need 75 kilowatts. I choose to do that in offsite renewables. You're only allowed to use the offsite if you cannot physically fit it. Is that correct?
Yes. If you cannot physically fit it or your building is too shaded and you won't meet the there's an incident solar radiation requirement that if you can show you don't meet that.
And are you allowed to split it? Can you do some on-site and some off-site?
There is not a clarification around if you can split it.
I remember that when we looked at this for the Denver code in the last code cycle, I do remember that came up and it was like the way it was written, a lot of things, it wasn't physically possible. And then there was no way to do some on-site and some off-site. So my issue then with the second bullet is, I don't know about anybody else on this call, but I've never been able to successfully implement off-site renewables like a solar farm in time for a permit process. Like the timing challenge around that has been a hurdle I've never been able to overcome. I don't know if anybody else has. The whole Denver Green Buildings Ordinance, like offsite renewables, is a compliance option. Not a single project in Denver has been able to use offsite renewables as a compliance option because of the timing challenges around that. So, I have a lot of concerns if project can't meet bullet 1, they're not going to be able to meet bullet number 2. Just hasn't been done yet. There's also the question about, does that need to be in Colorado? Can I buy offsite renewables in Pennsylvania or something like that? How that works, because that opens the door a little bit more, but it also isn't then necessarily helpful for Colorado. And then just similar questions about the productions for the RECs as far as a kilowatt hour generation, and same challenges with the timing around that. So if this is something that becomes building permit dependent, and there maybe need to be something in here that gives a little more flexibility as to timing, or it's just not going to be enforceable.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So 2 of your other questions, that does state, well, the base code does state that any offsite renewables would have to be within the local utility or distribution entity. That same requirement is not for the RECs that you can purchase on the market. And then there is also a requirement for offsite renewable energy at 1.75 kilowatt hours per watt for those offsite RECs or offsite energy that you're purchasing. Okay, I think Rob, you were next. Is there anything else, Elizabeth? Sorry.
No, that's good. I think we have to look at this about doing basically on-site versus RECs, because we don't have any, there's no available off-site solar for Colorado. It's gone. The waiting list is years long. So that's just not even an option for us really. So we'd have to look at the RECs, and then I think we should consider if partial credit, or being able to split it, to do some on-site and some RECs, and to build that in there, because I don't think the language allows that right now, and it's just not really realistic. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks. The this is obviously, I think this requirement is pretty consequential for us. So I can't speak expertly on any of this stuff, but I will, our team's aware of this and will provide some input. On the question of incentives, I do want to point out, this isn't necessarily positional. I want to make that really clear, but the statute that we're operating under does explicitly state that utilities are allowed to offer incentives to comply with this code, and doesn't affect anything having to do with our program. So I think there's a pathway for the rebates to continue even if this is part of the required building code. So there's a pathway for that too.
Thanks, Rob. Carolyn?
Yeah, quick question for David, and just to clarify my general understanding of what we can or cannot do. And I'll just name this as, this is one of the provisions in the 2024 I probably hate the most. So I think we're going to have a robust discussion, as you've already seen. It's my understanding we can go less stringent. We just cannot go more. So using this provision as an example, we could elect not to include it, but we could not, for example, require 1 watt per square foot gross, or change the floor area, because that would be more stringent. Is that kind of consistent? I mean, meaning we couldn't increase the stringency of that first bullet by requiring more solar per square footage or expanding the square footage beyond what's constrained, but we do have discretion to eliminate or modify it in a less stringent way. Correct?
That's correct legally. Now, what constitutes more or less stringent is something we might need to wrestle with.
And I think, Carolyn, it would be pretty justifiable to say that removing the requirement altogether is less stringent. So I think
Right.
I think what you're asking is, can we remove it entirely, not just weaken it as well? And I think the answer is yes, technically that is allowed by the statute.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that, just because I do think that this one has a lot of complexity. I think I'll just name the other issue is that we're developing this code in a statewide construct as we know it today. That's changing and will not be the same by 2030. And so I think we could get very hung up trying to talk about utility allowances, considerations, incentives, acknowledging that we're building buildings in regulated and non-regulated utility spaces and others. And so there's likely a point in time where we just need to acknowledge that and make the best decision in terms of what's a enforceable building code.
Thanks, Carolyn. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in and maybe ask some questions for Rob about the Xcel incentives also. I know you've all have probably been experiencing for the jurisdictions that do have EV charging mandated already. That did take away the rebates. And Xcel does not rebate anything that is required by code. And that's a big deal because it did make everything a lot more expensive. So we do need to keep that in mind, and especially when we're talking about cost effectiveness and payback and all that a lot of those calculations include those incentives and whatnot. There's a loophole there if you make something an option. So for example, if we look at these 4 bullets, instead of saying you have to do solar, instead of it, if we say you could do on-site solar or you could do RECs, the magic word for Xcel is usually optional. So if you give people different options to comply with this intent, then you're keeping the door open for the incentives and rebates. So to keep that in mind, and that's true for everything, that is, as soon as we're not mandating something, it is still rebatable.
And then Elizabeth, just for what it's worth, by the time this code goes into effect, I don't believe that Xcel will be in the market of purchasing RECs from on-site solar anymore.
Good point.
Great. Any other considerations or concerns for section C405.15? All right, let's add another layer of complexity. Can we go to the next slide? There also now is required to have electrical energy storage capacity for the required PV system. That capacity, if it is not installed, you have to have space as well as the required electric infrastructure for that future energy storage system. It does specifically state electrical energy storage. So I know Adam and I were discussing if, you know, thermal energy storage would be allowed, but it does specifically state electrical energy storage. So we are looking, well, this is kind of an extreme example, but you have to provide the square footage required under the fire code to properly ventilate and exhaust any battery storage in the building. This one threw me for a loop more than the on-site PV one did. I'm surprised. All right. Any questions on this or concerns? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I am confused. So bullet 1 says required,
Yeah,
and then bullet 2 says alternate, and the alternate is just to require the space.
correct. It is poor wording. So it does. It is
Understatement. Sorry.
yeah. So your alternate is to just provide the space and not the actual storage capacity. If you do not provide the batteries themselves, you still have to provide the electric infrastructure.
Okay, because in the building code, I should say the electrical code, they're trying to put this in the 27 building code, but it's just a pointer to the electric code that storage, the room where that ESS is, needs to be a 1 hour separated room from the rest, just like a vault. Or so that'd be interesting if we just require the space. Does it still have to be 1 hour? But that's a different discussion.
Yeah. I'm trying to see. I think it just says that it has to comply the spacing, the size of the room and spacing requirements of the fire code. And the area shall be sized in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. There's no requirements around, but I mean, I would assume each ESS ready area shall be located in accordance with the fire code. There's no requirements around the construction. Unless that
comes out of NFPA 70, the electrical code, which is our other state code.
Yeah, it's not referenced. Go ahead, Adam.
So I guess maybe just some clarification, kind of, Tim, I had similar questions when I was reading this. It really seems to me that it says that the electric storage readiness is what's required. And oh, by the way, you could put in electric storage and that would satisfy the readiness requirements. Is that how we should be interpreting this?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Then I'd suggest if we move forward with this, that we clarify the language that was not clarified in the lengthy energy code standard writing process.
Great. Okay. Okay. Section C406 had a full makeover. So this section now has a range of points that is required based on your occupancy type and climate zone. For climate zone 5B, well, actually, I think that's across all climate zones. The point totals range from 30 to 90, and they have a ton of different options. And I do not have slides for each option for compliance, but it is much more complex above and beyond what we had been seeing in the 2021. Some of the available categories include increased envelope performance, like we're used to seeing, more efficient HVAC performance, additional HVAC controls, DOAS, what we were used to seeing in the 2021, additional energy recovery over what's required, water heating efficiency. So not only providing lower flow water fixtures, but points assigned for high efficiency heat pumps, additional energy monitoring over what's required, energy savings in lighting systems, renewable and load management. So peak reduction strategies, and then renewables provided above and beyond what's required in the base code. Carolyn?
I didn't follow this process at the IECC as much. Do you happen to know if they did documented in any way compliance of this section with EPCA? I know it's can comply. I was just wondering if there's any documentation we can lean on through their analysis, particularly to the extent that we may or may not modify any of it, because it has to very squarely fall within the preemption exceptions. And so it's a pretty complex analysis. So I just wanted, like, if you happen to know if they did that or not.
Yeah, so we have the full code proposal available and we can take a look through all of that documentation. I do know that this was really fully vetted by DOE and there was a lot of analysis done that went into the creation of this. So we'll take a look and see if that information is included. Rob?
What's the envelope backstop that makes this a potential compliance pathway with the energy code, the conservation code?
Do you mean what do they have to do to achieve points?
No, not what they have to do to achieve points. I think on the res side, the envelope backstop is IECC 2009, and then you can use the additional efficiency requirements to achieve code compliance with 21. Is that analogous to the commercial side? Because I don't know it as well. And if so, what is that?
So they use a UA calculation. So basically the average U factor of your thermal envelope times the different areas of the building. You have to show a UA reduction of 15% to show additional energy efficiency above those prescriptive values. So those U factors that are listed in the base code.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. There also is are points available under reduced air leakage, so testing to show that the building operates with less infiltration. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, sorry. So the 21, did these numbers or the minimum requirements in C406 go up from what the base number required in the 21? I just pulled my book open. It looks like you need a minimum total of 10 credits. So did that base number go up?
Yes. Yes.
It went higher based on the type of occupancy, or did this generally go up?
Yeah, so I can, if you want, Kim, I can share my screen here. I didn't want to just, oh, it's disabled.
Adam, I think you'll just have to
You should be able to now.
Okay. So you're looking at the IECC, yeah? So within this section, we have the energy credit requirements by building occupancy group. So based on your building occupancy, for example, climate zone 5B, we have these point totals that you need to meet. There are also base requirements, and we get to it on the next slide. Sorry, there's limits to the energy efficiency credits that you can take for renewables on site. But there are base requirements, and I'm going to have to scroll. These tables get I may have passed it and I may have not. Sorry. There's a lot of tables. I'll stop sharing. Hold on 1 second so you guys don't have to watch me scroll. It's horrible. I hate watching people scroll. There are also base points that every project needs to meet, no matter their compliance path. So if you are complying with the code via section C407 and energy model, you will also have to show that you meet a certain number of credits. If I can find the table.
And I think one question that might also help to illuminate a little bit of what Tim is asking about is that they also completely redid the approach to how points are being assigned per measure as well. So Tim, it's not like we just went from 10 credits required to 90 credits required. there's also a complete revamp of how those credits are assigned for each of those additional measures.
Correct.
So it's
Yeah.
not like you're suddenly having 9 times more credits than you had before.
Correct.
I'm sure somewhere along the line, there'll be an analysis to show that, say, for a B occupancy, what that base amount is going to increase. Because I think what I've seen so far is probably going to be one of the bigger impact on a cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Sure.
And can you share a link to this draft? I know I haven't gone to the IECC site to find this second draft, but I'd sure like to grab that just to take a look.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Can you share your screen again, Kim? And we'll just talk about that next one. So in section C407, like I said, now, rather than just saying we need to see 20% annual energy cost savings above the baseline, we now have to see that percentage will change based on the number of points that are required in section C406. So for example, a group R building, group R2, it would require 90 points under section C406. So they would require within this calculation, 28% annual energy cost savings. A building like I2 only requires 43 points under section C406. So we're going to see, I think it's closer to 17% annual energy cost savings, but I'd have to recalc it. So that annual energy cost savings that's required for code compliance under the performance pathway is going to shift based on the occupancy type. If you have multiple occupancy types in your building, oh, thanks, Adam. If you have multiple occupancy types in your building, you're creating a weighted average. And then there are additional renewable and load management credit requirements that are mandatory. We have to show a certain number of points based on, again, occupancy and climate zone, even if you are complying with section C407 to show additional energy efficiency. Any questions? Great. Commissioning, there was only one change, clarifications around system exemptions for residential units under the commercial code. And that was it. Oh, so then what we did was we took, most important part, we took our 2 example buildings, or technically 4, an all-electric office that would have complied under the 2021 IECC, a mixed fuel office, an all-electric multifamily building, and a mixed fuel multifamily building. And we updated those energy models to show compliance with the 2024 IECC. We also took a stab at calculating the estimated first cost, and I did it on a per square foot basis because things get a little bit wonky if we're talking about specific examples. But so for offices, we're seeing a slightly higher increase in first costs at around $22 a square foot, and multifamily buildings are around $15 a square foot. The estimated annual energy cost reduction is close to 30 cents a square foot for both office buildings, and then close to that $19 a square foot for multifamily buildings. We are seeing slight EUI reductions, 22% for the all-electric office, 15% for the mixed fuel, 26% for the multifamily, all-electric multifamily, and 11% for the mixed fuel multifamily. Go ahead, Adam.
Just wondering if, given that we're looking at all electric versus mixed fuel for the multifamily and for the offices, did this modeling take into account the non-heat pump penalty, essentially? So for those mixed fuel buildings, those additional efficiency credits that are required, do these cost impacts does that factor that in?
It does. When I was looking through the offices and looking for kind of cost-effective ways to meet section C406, it didn't seem as high of a first cost to meet those additional points. But again, this is an early analysis on first cost. The big drivers of this were trying to calculate the space that would be required for the electric system. Oh my gosh, sorry. For the battery storage, requiring all of that space. And then also the PV were relatively small systems, so they didn't have a huge cost impact, but we did go a little bit conservative on the cost per square foot of the PV. I think I went around $4.50 per watt. And then the other big impact, we have a little bit of actually, I just pull my calc up to see, but another big impact was going to be the increased energy efficiency for lighting. Once we start showing some of those additional points and really driving down lighting power densities, you're looking at pretty high cost fixtures, as well as the EV charging was a big jump, because in the 2021 base code, there's no EV charging required. So some of those items really drove up the first cost. Tim, I think you were first. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So this estimated annual energy cost reduction, was that taken from just Excel's numbers or some kind of a average from all the different providers? I know I have United Power and Excel kind of split in half with Broomfield.
Yeah, that's a great question. We used Colorado EIA rates. And it was the most up-to-date rates that were released, and I want to say it was November 2023, but I could be misspeaking about what month it was.
Residential or commercial electric rates are different.
Commercial.
Thanks.
Yeah. Carolyn, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if it would be possible to get the, or if you have the cost premium as well as the cost reductions broken out by what contributes to them. So to your point around like the addition of the EV charging requirements versus like the solar component versus the efficiency, not at every measure level, but certainly the major tranches would be of interest, I think, for us to better understand where the premiums and savings opportunities lie. So like, as you noted, like the 2021 didn't have the EV charging requirements or the solar. Those are both premiums in terms of first cost. Presumably the solar is credited in your model towards the annual energy cost and driving a lot of that reduction. And so trying to understand those nuances, I think, would be helpful for us to then evaluate some of those provisions and whether we want to retain or exclude them based on how they balance that equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can provide you with kind of estimated percentages of the first cost for these first cost items. So we can say, we estimated that PV was 15% of the cost increase, whatever it was. I don't have that calculation, but we can definitely provide you with that, as well as the annual energy cost with and without the on-site PV. Would that be helpful? Great. Elizabeth?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think we'll need to have a lot of transparency for this for the public as well. And then not just the cost by, end use or amendment, or, what are the high impact things from a cost standpoint, but also the EUI impact. Like, I'm guessing that EV charging is not having an EUI reduction impact to the buildings. Obviously, there's other community impacts there. So I think another metric may be required here beyond just building EUI, and maybe you're looking more at also like community greenhouse gas reductions, because otherwise, EV charging is going to look like zero value from an energy savings impact here if we're to look at cost effectiveness.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Tim?
Yeah, I know that a lot of discussions usually around the kind of two components, like the first cost versus long-term energy or financial savings. The struggle I have with that discussion is developers, in my experience in Broomfield anyway, in the last 30 years, they'll build, so they're the ones responsible for the first cost to complete a project and then get that thing leased up, and they sell a portfolio. And most of the multifamily projects, and we've had a lot of them in Broomfield, they're sold before they're even finished. So the first cost is really the bigger impact, at least on a development community. And I'm not going to disagree that over the long term, there's going to be savings, but it's not affecting the first time. Even people buying homes. I don't know anybody who buys homes and keeps them more than 5 or 7 years, except me. I've had my house so I'm maybe an anomaly, but that's why I just wanted to throw that. I know I'm going to have discussion on the other end, and so I just wanted to throw that on the table.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Kristen?
The split incentive issue that Tim brings up was always the biggest one when I was working at EPA and Department of Energy, from both a partnership, co-development, and a voluntary incentive perspective. You have this issue of who pays and who decides. And when we talk about wanting to bring in the equity aspect and get public feedback on that, I would remind folks that, if you are a renter, if you purchase, if you're a commercial tenant, or if you're a residential tenant, you often don't get to make those decisions up front. So from a justice perspective, I always heard an earful from those folks who are on the other end, where they're like, well, sure, the builder would love to spend less, but if that makes me pay more, then, how is that equitable? So, there's both sides of that coin.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Okay.
Anna, so that looks like your last slide on my end. So, we've got about 10 minutes left. I think I would open up the floor. My next steps will take a minute, but want to make sure if there's any other discussion from the board, any other slides you guys want to re-review, anything else you want to ask Anna about. We've got some time and space to do that.
Adam?
So I think I would just first point out so it's going to start with a point and end with a question. I think I would point out, in thinking through some of these estimated first costs as well, we're comparing to the 2021 IECC, not to Colorado's minimum energy code requirements. So keep in mind that electric vehicle ready, which Anna noted are a big contributor to that upfront first cost, are already part of our minimum requirements. So we shouldn't necessarily be thinking about that as being an entirely distinct calculation. And I guess then the question comes, Anna, is could we perhaps do this some sort of similar comparison to where we factor in the state's electric ready, EV ready, and solar ready requirements, and do a cost differential of the 2021 IECC plus that versus the 2024 IECC? Because I think we really can't take the 2021 IECC alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great
as the comparison.
Yeah, I think that's a great point for I think we have a meeting dedicated, partially at least dedicated. I'm looking at you, Kim, looking for you, on the local codes and comparisons. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that should be in 1 or 2 or 3 meetings from now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks, Adam. Was there anything else? Okay, Carolyn?
Yeah, no, I was just going to echo Adam's point. I think that was the genesis of my question first about how our state minimum EV ready requirements and electric ready requirements and other requirements compare to the 2024, and then also to get a breakdown of that first cost. I imagine, just having gone through this exercise for our own code update, that the majority of those $22 per square foot or $15 per square foot are the solar first and then the electric ready second. Just acknowledging that you're paying for that solar and for that electric charging infrastructure. And it's the efficiency, the other efficiency components are moderate to little within that number. But I think getting clarity around that will be especially important for us as we balance that economic impact of the code conversation. Because as you point out, we already have in base code a lot of the core requirements. And we need to just determine like how far we take it into the 2024 within that space. So
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Tim?
Yeah, and thanks, Adam, for bringing that up, because Broomfield, we adopted the electric ready and solar ready code as of this past January, one of the first ones, at least in the Front Range. So I'm having some limited experience being a guinea pig, so to speak, with enforcing this, and Adam can share lots of emails between he and I on how to enforce and what the questions and intent. But with that being said, there are additional costs. I couldn't tell you what they are, but across the board with the electric ready, solar ready, and EV ready, especially on the R2 side, the apartment side, there are additional costs, and I'm hearing about it big time from some of the new apartment projects that are getting ready to come in for permit, and on the commercial side too. Single family, not as big of an impact, but definitely on a commercial side. So I'm not sure how Lotus would be able to come up with that cost differential, but fortunately I amended out the allowance to ask for a waiver for that 1% cost differential, where I would have a lot of good numbers for you. But we did that as a strengthening amendment, at least for my council. Thanks.
Good job, Tim.
Yes. Good job, Tim. I think, and Tim, you are, I think, actually the second jurisdiction in the state to adopt. Technically, Estes Park adopted before you, sorry. But you are second out of like, we have like 14 or 15 now, which is pretty cool. One thing just in terms of trying to understand the cost impacts of that differential, and I'm wondering, and we can talk about this more, kind of offline in preparation for future meetings, but I think we could perhaps consider some sort of analysis where we factor in those differentials as, some of those requirements in the electric ready and solar ready code as essentially functioning as part of the baseline, and then rerun some of the calculations to see really what are those differentials from 2024 rather compared to what we are actually having as our baseline compared to 2021, which is not really our only baseline.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any final thoughts, questions?
Really quickly, that last point, I think it would be really helpful on the all electric versus mixed fuel to get clarity around what we're assuming for savings on the infrastructure side. So as you're going through that, if you could think about that breakout as well.
Just to be clear, you're talking about like gas hookup, gas infrastructure and hookups, and yeah, okay.
Yeah, so meter sets and plumbing and ducting costs. We certainly have all seen those numbers, but I think we need to bring that into this conversation to talk about what we want to put forward. And I think those are just really important to understand where the savings come from.
All right. Well, thank you, Anna. That was a lot of technical things to get through, and you did amazing. And I feel like that was super clear, and I appreciate the board discussion around it. And we're going to have a lot to dive into and a lot to cover in future meetings. So looking forward to when that time comes. But for now, we will wrap up and talk about some next steps. So our next meeting is Friday, April 5th from 1 to 3 p.m. We will bring back during that meeting, we'll bring back sort of our updated version of the public engagement plan. I have final approval written on this slide, but if it needs some more work and sort of discussion, we certainly, I think, have time within our schedule to allow for that. So we will come back with a different version of that, incorporating all of your feedback at the next meeting. We won't need that second bullet to continue the commercial base code provisions. There are a couple questions that were flagged for Anna that we wrote down that we might spend some time answering in the first part of that meeting. And if you all think of any other questions between now and then, please come prepared to talk about those or ask Anna those at the start of the meeting. And then we'll use the majority of the time during our next meeting to go through the residential side of the code and the major changes. So that's what we will have on par for you guys next. And then at my final bullet there around contacts for the webinar, as our team coordinates next steps for the public engagement plan, we will be in touch via email with the board to ask for some of those. So that's all I've got for you. Oh, yeah, Adam.
Unrelated to this, so just if you want to finish this quickly, I can jump in after.
That's all I had. Go for it.
Cool. So I just wanted to quickly revisit the question that Tim had raised at the last meeting about providing access to copies of the code. So we have gone back and thought about this a little bit, and a couple of challenges for us is one, we don't really have any funding set aside to buy a bunch of code books for all of you. So that is one challenge. And the other is more of a question is, are all of you familiar with ICC's online code versions? I realize that they're not always 100% the most friendly to work with at times. You know, there can be some challenges in terms of you certainly copying and pasting, but I think there have also been some improvements that they now are searchable at the very least, which is helpful. I think at one time they were not searchable and they are now. So that does help. But I just wanted to share that I'm not ignoring your suggestion, Tim. We're just trying to think through what that might look like. And Kim's here kind of giving just a brief overview of what that online version of the code looks like. So there is not currently an online version of the code for 2024, seeing as 2024 is not final, but we anticipate that ICC would be more likely to get the online version out probably more quickly than they would the official code books anyway. So just wanted to share that that's kind of where we landed with that. And if there is anyone who feels that there is just absolutely a huge challenge with using this online version and would like to express that to us either now or privately over email, please feel free to do that, and we will figure out a way to accommodate that. But I think we have kind of landed with that using the online version is probably the most effective and the most cost effective for the Energy Office, which has no money to pay for code books. So as I said, if anyone wants to share a challenge with that or any, strong resistance to that, please feel free to email us afterwards and we can try to figure out a solution for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. And thank you, Tim, for dropping the link. Just to quickly share, you guys can easily search through the different codes using the search bar. And then the primary navigation happens in the left-hand column here, and using Control F, you can at least do a control search through the code page that you have up. If I look for energy and I'm on page, and I'm in chapter 5, it's not going to pull up energy references in a different chapter that I don't have up. But if anyone has any technical concerns or wants to do a review of this, as Adam shared, happy to carve out some meeting time for that, to make sure you all feel very comfortable in using that as a resource. So with that is all we've got for you guys. So happy Tuesday. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon. And thank you as always for being here and for listening and learning and participating with us. So we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.